The agenda this week examined Ontario's new basic income pilot, heard the benefits of harm reduction and community in dealing with addiction, and looked back at the publishing phenomenon of Harry Potter. The agenda's Week in Review begins with strong words on how Canada deals with the disclosure of HIV status.
What does Canadian law say about people living with HIV and their sexual partners?
So at the moment, Canadian law is amongst the widest in the world in terms of criminalizing people living with HIV.
What do you mean, like in the widest in scope?
Widest in scope. Okay. So what has most often happened as Canadian law has evolved is that people living with HIV who are accused of not disclosing their status to a sexual partner in a wide variety of circumstances have been charged with and prosecuted for an offense called aggravated sexual assault, which is one of the most serious offenses in our criminal code and carries some of the most serious penalties in the criminal code. Potentially life in prison and mandatory designation as a sex offender, presumptively for life. So it is one of the most serious charges, and we've seen the very widespread application of that particular provision of the criminal code to a whole range of circumstances, even when there has been no or exceedingly small risk of actually transmitting HIV. And one of our concerns has been that the law continues to expand, even as the science increasingly tells us that the law is out of step with what we know about the risks of transmission. And we've seen about 184 cases that we know of so far where people have been prosecuted in Canada. Wide range of circumstances, but as I say, many of them since 1989. Okay. And that actually gives us one of the highest numbers of prosecutions in the world and one of the highest per capita rates of prosecution of people living with HIV. So when you say we're a world leader in prosecuting people, that is unfortunately true, and that's the unfortunate reality facing people living with HIV in Canada now, because we have this very broad, and I would argue stigmatizing and unwarranted application of the criminal law in a vast array of circumstances that really don't deserve the attention of the criminal law.
I'm wondering, what role does intent play in the charges, I suppose?
So at the moment, under Canadian law, in fact, the prosecution does not need to prove that someone actually transmitted HIV to a sexual partner or that someone even had the intent to transmit HIV to a sexual partner. So this is how low the bar has been set in Canada. International recommendations have fairly consistently said that we should probably be limiting the use of the criminal law in these cases to those circumstances where there is actual transmission of the virus and where it is proved that the person intended to transmit the virus. And yet Canada has set the bar much, much lower, and that's why we have this very wide application of the criminal law that is really causing a lot of harm that I think we'll talk about more today.
Okay. And Edwin, when did countries begin prosecuting people for offenses relating to not disclosing their HIV status?
The first cases were around 87, 88. So, Canada was amongst the first in the world to do so. I think the very first case took place in Germany, very soon after that in the US military. And then the US started passing in a lot of HIV-specific criminal statutes, and prosecutions have ramped up since then.
And in Canada?
So I think prosecution started really ramping up following the Currier's decision at the Supreme Court in 1998, which basically framed HIV non-disclosure as a sexual assault.
Are these laws just specific to HIV?
So in Canada, of course, you're using general laws, and actually quite a number of different laws have been applied and can be applied. And non-disclosure it's basically of something that's considered to be a serious communicable disease when there is a significant or now a realistic possibility, according to the 2012 Supreme Court ruling, of a risk of transmission. And so very rarely other sexually transmitted infections can be and have been prosecuted in Canada and have been, for example, in England and Wales and in Scotland, which have different laws applied, but because they're using general laws around grievous bodily harm or reckless endangerment, you can apply apply them to other sexually transmitted infections. However, HIV is by far the virus that is singled out, and that's because of the stigma of HIV.
We're going to talk more about the stigma, yeah?
In Canada, I mentioned there are about 184 cases of people with HIV being prosecuted for allegedly not disclosing their status. We're aware of maybe 5 or 6 prosecutions involving other sexually transmitted infections. So just that stark difference in numbers right there tells you this is really about singling out people living with HIV for this really intense scrutiny and punishment under the criminal justice system.
So if somebody has HIV, when are they expected to disclose that they have HIV? Like before they kiss somebody, or like when are they expected to do that? So
that's really one of the most important questions. And under Canadian law at the moment, as Edwin was mentioning, in the context of an important Supreme Court decision that happened about 5 years ago, the court said if there is a realistic possibility of transmitting HIV, then that's when there is a duty to disclose that arises. So it kind of depends on, in theory, on what the sexual act is. Now, on the face of it, that might not to many people sound like it's particularly problematic. You know, it says realistic possibility, that's when you have a duty to disclose. But even though the court actually said, what we're not trying to do here is actually criminalize people in those cases where there's an extremely small or speculative risk of transmission. There has to be a realistic possibility before you have a duty to disclose. In practice, what they then went on to do is actually apply it in ways that mean exceedingly small risks of transmission are still captured by the criminal law. And we see many, many prosecutions in which there's even no risk of transmitting HIV, and yet someone has been prosecuted for not disclosing. So on the one hand, you have the notion of the standard being set up here of a realistic possibility in theory, but how that's actually been playing out is really problematic. It's much, much broader than that. The bar has actually been set in practice much, much lower.
I want to get into some numbers. We have a couple of graphs to show you from Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, your organization, Richard. The first one shows the yearly number of HIV-related criminal cases in Canada up to 2016. As you can see, there was a big spike in 2010, but they seem to have come down since then. How prevalent are these kinds of prosecutions, Richard?
Well, we see, as you've just pointed out, from year to year, we see anywhere between, half a dozen cases to 10 or 12 cases in a year. I think it is worth noting that more than half of those prosecutions have actually happened here in Ontario. And that's disproportionate compared to the number of people living with HIV in Ontario as opposed to other provinces in the country. And I think we should probably talk a little bit about why that is. But Ontario is really a hotspot of criminalizing people living with HIV.
We're going to get into the whys in a minute. And Natisha, I want to get you into the conversation. But I wanted to follow up with you, Richard. 200 cases over 17 years. It doesn't really seem like a lot of convictions. So why is this a big issue?
Well, it's a big issue for a couple of reasons. One, because many of these cases actually will attract a lot of media attention. Some of that has not been particularly well-informed media coverage. It leads then to further misinformation in the general public about HIV and what the perceived risks of transmission actually are. Mm-hmm. And there's already this exaggerated sense of how easy it is to transmit HIV that is driving these prosecutions in the first place. And this just kind of creates a feedback loop of, well, why would you be prosecuting this case if there weren't something really seriously wrong here, if there wasn't some serious harm done or some serious risk of harm? And yet, as I said, we see a very wide application of the law.
Would a basic income reduce poverty more effectively? What did you conclude about that?
Yes, and that is because all the existing programs that we have had, ODSP,
Disability Support Plan,
and Ontario Works and all the rest, have really not had a significant impact in reducing the amount of people who live in poverty. They have helped people in poverty manage a little better. But because of the disincentives built into ODSP rules and Ontario Works rules, it actually discourages people from finding work because they risk a dollar-for-dollar clawback under the present system. The new pilot project will test a different approach which doesn't discourage work, and I think that is a better way to bridge to the future so that people are not trapped in poverty but can work their way out in a way where if they're well enough to do so, they get a chance to do so.
Let's ask the second question you asked, which is sort of what you just alluded to, but not exactly. You said, would it discourage work? The question you asked in the report is, would it encourage people to work? What's the conclusion there?
Well, any program that says, we're going to give you $640 a month, and if you earn more than $200, we're going to tax it back at 100%, whatever it may be doing, It's not encouraging work. And so, and I met with people in the preparation of the discussion paper who said that, you know, one woman who was a very bright young economist happened to be a paraplegic and said she knows as she gets older, the costs of managing the paraplegia are going to become more substantial. Under ODSP, she gets about $1,200 a month now, but if she were to find work that generated meaningful income, which she had the capacity to do, she could lose that benefit, a risk she wasn't prepared to take. Any program that makes people work against their own long-term economic best interests, however well-intentioned, is wrong, and we need to find a better way.
Another question you ask, would it produce better health outcomes and better life chances for recipients? Conclusion on that is?
Well, what we know now is that welfare recipients have people who live beneath the poverty line. By the way, we're also talking about working people who live beneath the poverty line, who are not getting welfare, but are earning less than what is deemed to be the low income measure. Folks get sick sooner when they're poor. Their diet is worse. Their kids have worse educational outcomes. They go to hospital at a younger age. They stay longer because they have nowhere to go. They have shorter lives. And poverty is one of the very best predictors of bad health outcomes. So we know that if you can reduce the level of poverty, you can reduce the people who have bad health outcomes, and they get longer lives, better quality of life, all of which has huge savings for the system, aside from being a humane and moral way to try to encourage social and economic growth and activity.
It's always a choice at what age to start these programs. You've suggested 18. How come?
Well, there was quite a debate on that issue, those of us who got a chance to work on this, and frankly, you need to know that most of our Ontario universities have food banks, and that the notion that you're 18 and at school does not directly insulate you from poverty. And there's a whole bunch of 18-year-olds who aren't at school, who are working at menial, low-income jobs. A lot of my friends on the right, the conservative framework, will say, you know, if you pay someone to do nothing, they will do nothing. To which my response is, well, then how come 70% of the people who live beneath the poverty line in Ontario have jobs? Some have more than one. They just don't earn enough with the various minimum wages to deal with the cost structure in their city.
When you suggest that to them, what's the comeback from them on that?
They're troubled by it because they actually think that people who work should be able to get by. And the truth is, the structure of how we pay people and casual labor and all the rest is such that not everybody has that opportunity.
Let me make all of you headline writers to start off with, and we're going to go around the table. If you were writing the headline to describe how you feel about what the province intends to do on the basic income pilot, Deb Hutton, what does your headline read?
A simpler, better path to poverty reduction.
Okay.
I would say poor, overstretched Ontarians given false hope with an economically unsustainable program.
I'm sensing a divergence of opinion. Go ahead.
Basic income, the solution for what's coming.
The solution for what's coming. Okay, and Sheila?
I would say paradigm shift in income security.
Let's follow up on that. What does that mean? Because paradigm shift is not something you see in headlines too often.
I think the underpinning of a basic income is just so fundamentally different than the structure with which we think about welfare and social assistance and other kinds of income security too that have all been, most of the rest of our income security system is based on having a job most of your life and having a good job that's going to provide you with benefits and things. So our systems are structured that way. And they also seem to depend on this idea that you're deserving or undeserving, that people who end up in poverty have done something themselves to cause that. And I think with a basic income, it's a recognition that we all have common needs in society. We all have common vulnerabilities. Things can happen to any of us. And we need to recognize that in policy.
Deb, the thing I found interesting about the piece you just wrote not too long ago was that on the one hand, you were saying you like the idea of a basic income, as your headline suggested, but you had a lot of concerns about what the current provincial government had in mind in terms of unrolling it. Express that a bit, if you would.
So the reason I think a basic income is both a small c conservative-based principle and the reason I like it is twofold. First, it should be the most simple form of getting a form of social assistance to help those people who truly need it without spending massive amounts of money on the system and on civil servants. So dollars actually getting to the people who need help.
So you like the simplicity
And I
of it.
like that. And I think from that simplicity comes things like transparency for taxpayers. I think it's more difficult to defraud the system, some of the things that a lot of us are challenged when it comes to social assistance.
What concern did you have about the way the Wynne government's rolling it out?
So for starters, they did not take, and to their credit, Hugh Segal recommended this, so they followed Mr. Segal's recommendations. They didn't replace the basket of social assistance programs that we have with a single basic income. They did replace only Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program. Everything else is in place. So, and it's a pilot project, so I understand that it's more difficult to do, but you don't have any savings when it comes to the size and cost of the civil service to administer the programs. So I have a huge problem with that. The second reason I really like basic income is that it, I believe, does encourage people to get off social assistance and get back to work. And that should, in my view, be the goal of any social assistance or welfare program that we have, that it's a temporary program to allow people to get into the job market or return to the job market and become self-sufficient.
We're going to unpack that idea more as we go along. Liz, what do you like about what the province is attempting to do here?
I think it actually sets us up for the labor market that we're already in and the one that's coming, which we've seen that almost 40% of Canadians have precarious incomes right up the income scale. And that volatility is negatively impacting their ability to save, to plan financially, and it's causing them to go into debt. So having a basic income, particularly for the low and modest, will help those who are affected most by that to actually improve their financial stability and outcomes. I also like, for all the reasons that Deb and Sheila have outlined, the restoring dignity to people, moving away from policing. It's more efficient. It'll be more effective at helping those who can work to contribute to society, or those who can't to perhaps volunteer or to spend time caregiving, which is a really growing need. But most importantly, I think we're looking at a huge shift in our labor market with automation and the rise of artificial intelligence. And experts are now predicting that we may lose anywhere between 30 to 45, 48% of the jobs that now exist. So if we're entering into a world where we're having entire categories of jobs disappearing and we don't have an adjustment plan for people, then the basic income makes a lot of sense as the first line of defense against really a breakdown in social cohesion and the ability of people to make ends meet.
You just made the decision to quit cold turkey like that?
Oh, yeah. Being pregnant for the second time, and just knowing that getting myself in a different headspace and keeping this baby healthy was the most important thing, as well as knowing that it would be healthier for my oldest son, that it was just a lifestyle change I wanted to make. And when that happened, everything else started changing too. I went to school, and then I won a scholarship, so I went back to college again, and just from there, things changed. And meeting people along the way that supported me, knowing that I was a drug user, but I was still trying to accomplish everything that I want to accomplish.
What did you take at school?
First, I took the Assaulted Women and Children's Counseling and Advocate course at George Brown College. I won the Sandra Fishley Scholarship for advocacy in my community. And then I went back and fast-tracked through the Human Resources program with a major in addiction and a minor in mental health.
George Brown again?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
Have you had any relapses since then?
Yes. Yeah. Many.
And how do you handle that?
Poorly. Depends, actually. When I decide to use, that doesn't feel like a relapse to me. I'm just using. But when I use out of maybe like reflex, or when I didn't want to use that extra money I had saved for something, or just bad timing, then I can shame myself into a bad place. Was there ever a moment where you thought you might lose one of them during the course of the documentary?
Well, as you alluded to with
Greg,
absolutely. but yeah, not.
You're the problem child.
Not to
here, right,
pick
Greg?
on you, Greg, but I didn't see Greg for about a year, and I definitely worried about him. And I was very glad that we reconnected when we did, and then led to some remarkable stuff. Yeah.
The Regent Park of today, compared to the Regent Park of the 70s and 80s, when the drug trade really became extremely problematic there. Marty, I wonder if you could make a comparison, because you know this is a neighborhood that's trying to make a transition right now.
Well, back in the days when Regent Park, like as I told you before, we had the community centers and whatnot, it was family oriented, you know, and it had all kinds of families, blacks, white, Chinese, whatever, and they all played together. Right now with this Regent Park revitalization, they've moved 90% of the people who I've grown up with out of the park. Where they put them, I don't know. What they're doing, I don't know, but...
Well, I think the idea is moving them to temporary quarters, and then when the redevelopment is done, people move back.
Okay, that's what they said. So let me put it to you what they're doing now. Right now, I'm saying, for instance, that there's 20 condo buildings in Regent Park now, in the new Regent Park. Only one of them is made for low-income housing. Okay, the other 19 are market value. Okay, so now when people, they said coming back, they call the people back who are going to be paying the market rent. Okay, they're not counting those people who are paying $113 per month for rent, because you have that in the condo building. One person paying $113, looks over his balcony, but he's paying $200,000 or $300,000 for that condo. You know what I mean?
But in terms of what let me put it this way. I think it's fair to say that there was certainly a time when the rest of the city looked at Regent Park as a place to avoid.
Right.
And now I see, you know, organizations like the Maple Leafs and the Raptors. I mean, they're building basketball courts there. They're putting facilities. They're putting, you know, infrastructure in place there. Does it feel to you like it's a neighborhood that is in the right direction?
No, because, I mean, these basketball courts, I mean, they put a baseball diamond in there for the Blue Jays. That was great. That was the old Regent Park for the kids. This basketball court they're talking about that Ratchet put in is there over in Moss Park, but once it gets built, you have to pay to go in there. They got a swimming pool in Regent Park, but you have to pay to go in there. You know what I mean? And it's not for the people who still live in Regent Park. I mean, the south side's all built up, plus part of the north, but there's still a north side that has about maybe 6 buildings that are still old Regent Park. You know what I mean? And they're slowly moving out.
Okay.
You know?
Roxanne, where do you live now? Are you still in the neighborhood?
Yep.
You are still there. So you're seeing it on a daily basis. Does this place feel like a different neighborhood for you now?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Better?
Well, I mean, it's prettier, if that's better. But I mean, it's not our communities that are benefiting from the new buildings. Like, what they've done by moving everybody out of those buildings, first of all, is they've scattered people all over the city. People that used to have community used to know that they could walk just down the hallway and get help, or they could walk across the street to the community center and take their children, and they could find a way for them to find some safe recreation. Now they're dropped all over the city. They have no community around them. A lot of people are using by themselves now and don't have someone with them.
For those who may be curious about the series but have never read a book or don't know much about it, why the enduring popularity in your view?
I mean, I get asked this question a lot, and it's a great question. It's one that's a little hard to answer, but it's an epic story. It's like all the great epic stories. It's like all the best art. It's about all the most important things in life. It's about life. It's about death. It's about how we live, how we love, how we're friends, how we choose to be in the world. It is, in the end, about all of these things, and there's not a person alive it doesn't have the power to touch if they're reading it with an open-minded heart, and so it's an instant classic.
Matt, what in your view would you add to that in terms of why the books are still so enduringly popular?
I think, as said, I think the themes are, enduring over time. I think they have relevance, especially now in terms of our, political themes. I think have tolerance and, I guess subversion in a way, have a certain, resonance now. I think, you can really relate to that at any stage. I know, 5 years ago, there was relevance in terms of, I guess, the same things, like just the themes that she kind of goes with. And I think that's, one of those, yeah.
not to fun and Dick and Jane it too much, but I mean, it's good versus evil, it's love, it's, I mean, all of those universal themes are there, aren't they, Vanessa?
Absolutely. And you know, there are all sorts of lovely statistics about it. It's the #1 most requested book in most prisons after the Bible. It's the most requested book even in Guantanamo Bay after the Quran. So I think that the other thing is the ubiquity of it, right? You want to read it because your friends know which houses they're in, and you want to read it in order to be part of a community. So I think that the popularity begets popularity, and I think now adults are really excited to read it with their kids, and that love of it is infectious.
I'm going to follow up with you because your Twitter handle is HP, Harry Potter, Sacred Text.
Yes.
Okay. I need to understand better about how you came to start reading Harry Potter as a sacred text rather than as a book for young people.
Yeah, so it started, I was in divinity school, and I'm interested in how to get young people back into religious spaces and how to change religious spaces for millennials. And I think that treating something as if it was sacred is hard. This goes to what you're saying too. It's and rigorous, and I think it's good for us to be asking big questions and wondering about our places in the world. And so why not do it with a text that's already beloved and that's easy to read? And so Harry Potter, with its popularity, and it's so good, I think that it invites these sacred experiences. As Jill was talking about, people read it every year as a source of comfort. There are people who read it, you know, on the anniversary of their father's death. They'll read a certain scene. Every time they go through a breakup. People have already ritualized Harry Potter. There are like Mecca sites, right? Again, as Jill was saying, there are traditions and tattoos, and I mean, there are so many things that people are already treating as if it was a religion.
That's the point, I guess. In the same way you'd go back to the Bible to read certain passages over and over, it's happening here. Jill, would you go so far as to say that there is a sacredness to the text?
Oh, of course. I mean, I'm a big fan of Vanessa and Casper and their podcast for that reason, and I think that's why it's become so popular, is because it is a source of comfort, it's a source of inspiration, it's a source of joy. You know, I just started rereading them again after the US election, which I found upsetting, and I just had a student of mine die kind of traumatically, and I found I couldn't really stand anything else. And so that was just an immense sort of comfort. Even though the books are not always happy, I think there's a kind of, it feels like communion. It feels like going back to your friends in a way, for sure, sacred.
Melissa, have you ever thought of them as sacred as opposed to just a publishing series?
Absolutely, and it's a shared text. It's a thing that, like Vanessa was saying, the ubiquity makes it something shared. So it's part of an experience that most people have together now. And so you get to relate to each other via this amazing metaphor, via this amazing story, just like all the best stories.
Matt, your connection to this, I guess, you run the Lockhart Cocktail Bar. Now, Lockhart, for those who don't know, do you want to explain what the connection there is?
I mean, it's... I mean, in the name?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, the name is, you know, obvious reference to Gilderoy Lockhart.
It's an obvious reference if you've read the book.
Sorry, yeah.
If you haven't read the book, it's not an obvious reference.
Sorry.
So who's Lockhart?
He was the much maligned Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher in the second book.
And do you find something sacred in the business that you're in as it relates to Harry Potter?
The business that I'm in, I mean, for me, the books were always an anchor home. So it's kind of, you know, I'm not from Canada. So it was always, I traveled a lot. So it was always a thing for me. I listened to the audiobooks a lot. Like I just listen to Deathly Hallows right now. I like drive a lot, so I'm always listening to them. And it's always, for me, it's I'm homesick if I'm, you know, feeling a bit lost. But also if I'm, at the same time, if I'm feeling, you know, happy, it's something I would, you know, celebrate by. I can't sleep if I'm not listening to Stephen Fry lulling me to sleep with a passage from the book.
What about the original print run for the very first book? How big was it?
The very first print run, and it's public, was 500 copies, of which 300 went to public libraries in the United Kingdom, which means if you are lucky enough now to stumble upon a first edition hardcover for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, that will cost you somewhere in the order of about $50,000 US. And I know this because where I am right now, UBC, was trying to put together their collection last year, and when they were trying to source one of those rare first editions, that's what it would cost you today.
Okay, well, it eventually did make a heck of a... Oh, you know what? Before I get to that, I should ask you, how and where did she write the book? The first one.
Yes, well, so she wrote the book in a series of cafes in Edinburgh. As she said, she had a young child at the time, and she chose to stay with the child and entertain by telling stories and writing in cafes. That's become part of the myth, the lore of Harry Potter. She writes the book gets published, and then, like every author, that's their initial dream, is to be published, to be public. She didn't have aims of becoming extraordinarily wealthy, as you were alluding to earlier. And when the book is published in the summer of 1997, and her first public event at a Waterstones, an equivalent of Indigo store in central London, in the basement, there are 2 people who show up. And as she says in interviews, the staff felt kind of sorry for her. She's a first-time author, so they thought they would bulk out the audience a little bit, and they got up to about 12. A dozen people saw the first reading of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Well, clearly it was not an overnight success, as in all at once. So what was the spark that really lit the fuse that made it go gaga?
Yeah. Well, now you're getting at the ineffable art of publishing, and it's a bit of a black art, because these type of books, in our business, we call them breakout books. They're books that people's expectations are relatively low. Many books get published a year, but almost now about a quarter of a million books a year in the North American market. And every now and then, a certain book will take off because of the word-of-mouth effect. And that's what happened with Harry Potter, that initially it was a number of booksellers and librarians who saw something in the story, and again, those children, those early readers who were telling other children, and other librarians were telling other librarians. By the middle of 1997, there was enough quote-unquote buzz about this that Arthur Levine at Scholastic acquired US rights for the book for a tidy sum. And then one fan talked to another fan, talked to another fan. And in technical terms, we call this the network effect. That's what we know today because of people like Malcolm Gladwell. The challenge is, it's very hard to predict when this is going to happen. It's very hard to predict how big this will become, and it's extremely hard to predict when it will end. The thing where Harry Potter is so extraordinarily different is that this was part of a word-of-mouth effect, but it never ended. It continues, and it continues to this day.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, June 23rd, 2017. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety if you want. They're all at tvo.org, our website, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page. That's periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.